open the waiting room. Hello everyone, we've decided to open this webinar just a minute early so people can begin filtering through. We're not starting just yet, giving people a chance to join. So please join at your leisure, get comfortable, make sure you have your coffee, croissants, water, whatever you might need. I'll be making introductions very shortly, but just for now, we are welcoming you all into this webinar.
Oh, lovely.
People saying hello. Hello, everyone.
Well, we've got hello from Germany. Nice.
You can see the TLC team on screen. Nilima is just disappearing into the attendee list. I will leave it just another few seconds before I make introductions. And I can see people in the chat. Hello, everyone in the chat. Okay, we have 74 people here, another 100 or so to arrive. But don't worry, we are recording this session, so nobody will miss anything. Welcome to the first ever TLC Online Writers' Day. My name is Aki Schilz. I am the Director of the Literary Consultancy. Also on your screen is Joe Sedgwick. He is our Editorial and Services Manager. Joe will just be here as a co-host in case of any glitches. And an admin person. So if you have any issues at all during this webinar and need somebody to private message, please private message Joe and he will be able to help you out. This is the 7th TLC Writers' Day that we have hosted, but the first one that we have hosted entirely online. So I would like to personally thank all of you for joining us and for being part of this digital experiment during the lockdown when everything has moved online and we are still, even a year in, getting used to exactly what formats work best, especially for writers and especially for conference style formats where we try and be as interactive as possible. To describe how the day will go, in the morning session, we have 2 seminars with amazing industry speakers. You will then have an hour's break for lunch, and then we will go into breakout sessions in the afternoon with a writing workshop and a pitch workshop. And then at the very end of the day, we will round up, say thanks to everybody, and declare the winner of the TLC Pen Factor Competition 2021. We will also be declaring live our long list, short list, and some highly commended titles for the first time live at the event rather than ahead of the event. So this, as I say, is a bit of an experiment for us. So we really thank you for your patience and forbearance. If there are any issues at all, as I say, please use the chat. We are hosting this using an online portal which you will all have had a link to. And our recommendation is that you keep the Online Writers' Day portal open throughout the day so that you have all of the links accessible to you. You will also have received from us a PDF guide with some top tips for getting through the day and making the most of the day. I can already see that the chat is active, but just to explain, the chat is open throughout the day. Please pop your messages there. I can see people saying good morning. It'd be lovely to hear where you're all from as well, because this is a digital event where you're all based in the chat. I'm also going to launch on your screen a short poll. So you should see, hopefully, if this has worked, on your screen now, a poll with some questions. We're just trying to find out, it's not a survey, we're just trying to find out who's in the room with us. In the afternoon session, there will be more interactivity. So you will be in meeting rooms rather than webinars in the afternoon, which means you'll get to talk and see each other. But because of numbers, just for this morning session, we are in a webinar format. So you will only be able to see the speakers on screen. You can also see one additional person on screen who is a very important part of this day. Maria is our live captioner from Stage Text. Everything today is captioned. Maria is giving us a wave. The morning session is live captioned via Stage Text, and in the afternoon we will have auto captions for your breakout sessions. All the content from today, once recorded, will be uploaded into your video library. The video library can be accessed via the portal. So please do have a look after this event, where you'll also see some bonus readings and some dispatches from a publisher and a bookseller. We will put, as I say, all the recordings from all of today's sessions into the video library so that you can access those after the event. If for whatever reason you happen to lose connection today, please don't worry, just use exactly the same link as you used to log in to log straight back in, and we will let you in via the waiting room. Slightly more on Zoom housekeeping. So the chat is there. When we have our speakers coming in, you will also see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button, and that's on the bottom right of your screen. When the speakers are coming in, we have left time at the end for questions so that you can ask questions to the industry speakers directly. Please use that Q&A button during the speakers' sessions to leave your questions for them. And at the end, we'll have a curated Q&A session. There are going to be lots of people in the room, so we might not have time to visit every single question, but we will try to get through as many as possible. Also on your portal page is a forum. So at the bottom of the portal page, if you scroll down, you should be able to see a something called forum, and where there is a forum, you can chat with other participants, leave comments, and just try and interact with people. Okay, so where are we? So Leodora Darlington is our first speaker. She will be arriving at 10 o'clock, and she is a commissioning editor at Canelo, and she's also the founder of an organisation called Owned Voices, which is for underrepresented writers and champions and platforms them, and has just recently run a prize. And our second speaker is Maria Garbutt-Lucero, who is the publicity director at Sphere. She will be talking about DIY publicity, so how you apply large-scale publicity tactics and strategies to help boost your writing, no matter where you are in your writing journey. And when Leodora talks, her title of her session is New Digital Frontiers. So what exactly can a digital publisher offer writers currently and today, and how digital publishing is much more than just producing ebooks. Let's have a check-in with our poll to see who's in the room with us. So currently we have 73% unpublished writers, 5% self-published writers, 22% traditionally published writers. 5% of people in the room are in the early stages, generating ideas and creative play. 20% are working on their first writing project. 61% have completed one or several manuscripts. 2% are published and happy with how they're published. 11% are published and looking for something more. So we hope that you can find it today. And on the third question about confidence levels, 20% are feeling unconfident, 67% relatively confident, 13% confident, and 0% super confident. So what we will be doing at the end of the day is revisiting this, and with any luck, those numbers will be significantly higher. Now, I can also see in my tech team has been in touch with me. We've got Slack happening on another screen as well, multi-screens, the digital age. There has been some kind of error with our portal. Now, for the time being, that's okay because you're all in the room. The tech team is working as hard as possible to fix this. I'm afraid this is sometimes what will happen with new formats that we're experimenting with, but we hope it will be up and running as quickly as possible. We are going to also send out an email to everybody on the guest list. Joe and Lima will send out an email to everyone on the guest list with reminders of all of your links, just so that even if the portal remains down, everyone can access everything from the day. But if you are here in the room with us this morning, please just stay on the line. There is no need to log out through the morning session. So let's go to chat and have a look at what people are saying. Okay, I think it just might be nice to see who's in the room and where everybody is from. Let's see what people are saying. Hello from Denmark. Hello from Windsor. Hello from Dorset, from Germany, from Bristol, from Southwest London, from Switzerland, from West Yorkshire, from Manchester, from The Hague, from Luton, from Kingston in Southwest London, from Aldgate, from West Midlands, from London. We have just been joined by our first speaker. Hello, good morning, Leodora. We are just saying hello to everybody who's come in from different parts of the world. I'm just reading out where everybody's from. From Germany, hello from London, hello from Bristol, hello from, I can only assume that's somewhere in Wales, which I unfortunately don't know how to pronounce correctly. But hello, Lynn from Wales. Hello from Somerset, Chichester, Hackney, the French Alps, Leicestershire, Kent, Trinidad and Tobago, Birmingham, Rodmell, the Canary Islands, Suffolk, West Berkshire, London, Germany, Hove, another one from the Canary Islands, St Leonards-on-Sea, the Wirral, my goodness, St Albans, Shropshire, Sussex, Dorset. Goodness me, we have people from all around the world. And just to answer those people who are still asking about the portal, please don't worry, our team is working on it and we have a tech person doing absolutely everything they can. So please don't log out of this session and you'll be able to access everything. Okay, so it has come time to introduce our first speaker. Leodora Darlington is joining us from, where are you joining us from, Leodora, today?
From West London. I'm in, Shepherd's Bush at the moment, where it's not too sunny, which is a shame.
Oh no, it's nice and sunny in East London. Well, I grew up in West London, actually. I'm an Ealing girl, so that's my home turf. I've already briefly introduced you, but I'll do it again. Leodora is the commissioning editor at Canelo, and her session is New Digital Frontiers. So Leodora will be talking about what digital publishing is, what it can offer to writers, and as I said just before you arrived, Leodora, how it's so much more than just ebooks. If throughout Leodora's session you have any questions, please use the Q&A function and ask your questions, and at the end of the session we will gather up those questions and we'll be able to have a chat together. So I'm going to end the poll, share those results with you just so that you can have a look at them. This is just a poll from the beginning of the day about who's in the room, so that should be appearing on your screen. And then Leodora, have you got your slides ready?
I do.
You have, wonderful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spotlight Leodora just so that everybody can see her on the screen. I'm going to mute myself and I'm going to hand straight over to you, Leodora, for New Digital Frontiers.
Fabulous. Now, can you see my presentation popped up?
Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to get going then. So first of all, welcome to everyone who's here. Thank you for being awake on a Saturday morning to listen to me talk about digital publishing. I hope you get a lot out of it, and hopefully you'll have lots of questions to ask me at the end of the presentation, which I'm really looking forward to. So I know I've been briefly introduced, but I'll quickly just give you an overview of who I am again. My name's Leodora. I'm a commissioning editor at Canelo. I have several years of experience working in commercial fiction publishing at digital publishers. So my experience includes publishing repeat ebook and print bestseller M.M. Chouinard, working on books by #1 bestsellers like Angela Marston's, Robert Brinzer and Carol Wire. I've been fortunate enough to work with authors whose books have been translated and sold in dozens of countries, who have had their stories optioned for film production, and whose paperbacks have sold hundreds of thousands of copies. And this has all happened through working with digitally led publishers. So that's what we're going to be discussing a bit more about today. Right, just to start with the basics and to think about what I mean when I'm talking about digital publishing. For the purpose of today, I'm going to be talking about independent publishers and imprints of larger publishers who have a focus on ebooks and other formats, but ebooks is their primary format. Now, there are certain advantages to digital publishing. One of the biggest advantages is that on the whole, it's a lot quicker to get to market. So that gap between delivering your book to an editor and that book landing in someone's hands or on their Kindle device or other reading device, that can be a lot shorter. So I'd say the quickest window that could be, if it's ebook only, say about 5 months, that's going through a full editorial process. And it's worth bearing in mind that if you're the kind of writer who likes to write quickly, that model can end up working quite well for you, because it means you're working with a publisher who can keep up with the pace of your writing, where there tends to be longer lead times in traditional publishing and just a bit more of a wait between books. So another really attractive advantage of digital publishing is the high royalty rates. So on average, the royalty rates per ebook are a lot higher than at traditional publishers. I'd say they start around 40% at digitally led publishers, compared to around 25% at traditional publishers. And what that can mean in terms of money, say for 1,000 copies of an ebook at $1.99 that's sold on Amazon, I'm going to use Canelo's model as an example. Our royalty rate starts at 50%. For 1,000 copies sold, that translates to £700 compared to £350. But I say this, it's a high royalty rates, but no advance model. So what that means is it ends up being higher risk, higher reward. So say, for example, you're offered a digital publishing contract and a 10K advance. Just thinking about the ebook sales, so that it doesn't become too complicated. Say a book sells 10,000 copies at the price I mentioned, that ends up being only about £7,000 through a digital publisher offering at that 50% rate. Now that translates to about 3,500 at a traditional publisher, but you have that £10,000 advance safe tucked away in your pocket. So even if the book only sells 10,000 copies, you don't have to worry about, not earning a certain level of money. You've got that advance safe. On the flip side of things, if your book sells exceptionally well, say it sells 100,000 copies, then you're looking at £70,000 from a digitally led publisher like Canelo, compared to £35,000 from a traditionally led publisher. And it's worth saying that digitally focused publishers are smarter at ebook publishing and therefore often better equipped to create digital success stories. I've worked on books that have sold 1 million copies at a higher price point than that. But it's really important to manage expectations, because not every book can be a bestseller, and it's increasingly tough to get books to the top of retailer charts. So there's that risk versus reward element. So just thinking about those disadvantages, I'd say that's one of the biggest disadvantages. You're sharing the risk with the publisher on whether you'll make money as an author. So it's really worth bearing that in mind. And also something to think about is, if you want bricks and mortar books presence, for many, if not most digital publishers, it's not an option. But there are some digital publishers who are focusing on mass market paperbacks in a really exciting way, and I'm going to come on to that. So digital publishers, are you getting the same deal from publisher to publisher? Now, you've probably picked up on this from what I've said already, but in short, no. I think one of the biggest differences, or one of the most significant differences to authors, is that paperback provision. So some independent publishers or digital publishers like Canelo or Aria have a big focus on producing a lot of their front list in simultaneous mass market paperback edition. And when I say mass market paperback edition, I'm talking about a more traditional paperback. So it's getting sold into retailers in the same way a traditional paperback would. It is a traditional paperback. But having said that, other digital publishers might partner with publishers who do paperbacks. So for example, Bookshaw partners with Sphere, which is an imprint of Hachette, and Sphere will release a select number of Bookshaw's titles in mass market paperback edition 2. Similarly, Hera is partnered with Canelo, and Canelo will release a select number of Hera's titles in mass market paperback edition 2. But it's not all about the MMPBs. A lot of digital publishers, if not most, will also do print-on-demand titles, or PODs, as I call them for short. Now, these sometimes get slightly sniffed at because you don't tend to see PODs in a physical bookshop. If you want to walk into Waterstones or Smith's and see a book, it's not going to be a POD, that's going to be a mass market paperback. But particularly in the last year, something that's been really interesting is watching the pattern of POD sales. So I'm sure some of you will have seen news from authors or stories from authors who've complained about their books not being available on Amazon during the pandemic. And that's because Amazon started to prioritize products that were key in dealing with the coronavirus outbreak. With print on demand, by its very nature, if a customer opts to buy a book, there's usually a special machine that can print and bind that book, and then that book can be sent out immediately. So it means that there wasn't that same level of delays, which means that POD sales have been really healthy at the moment. And if a book is a reasonable length. Print on demand book prices are slightly dependent on book length. If a book is a decent length, usually the margins on PODs are quite decent too, if it's going through KDP, which is Kindle Direct Paperback. I won't talk about all these boring techie things for too long. The short of it is you can be making really good money on PODs, and they will still be available to buy online at websites like Waterstones as well as Amazon. So it's worth thinking about that too. Audiobook revision tends to vary from publisher to publisher, but digital publishers by their very nature are really excited about digital formats. So they all tend to be invested quite heavily in audio and producing audiobooks. And that can be really advantageous because when it comes to audio sales, if you can have an audiobook released at the same time as an ebook and a paperback as well, it's really advantageous in pushing those audiobook sales. Simultaneous publication is something that you really want to strive for. Now, on the whole, thinking from publisher to publisher, something that should be consistent is really thorough editorial work. There can sometimes be a conception that with digital publishing, it's about rushing things through as quickly as possible. That should not be the case. It's always worth asking before signing what the editorial process would look like so that you as an author can feel comfortable and confident that it's what you're expecting. And generally speaking, if anything is important to you as an author, before signing a contract, ask your publisher about it to make sure that what you want is going to be provided to you. So on the whole, digital publishing, they tend to offer authors a fairer deal with those higher royalty rates. Now, Canelo's is the highest going that I'm aware of. It starts at 50% and escalates up to 60%. And I should say that when it comes to digital publishers, when we're looking at those royalty rate percentages, we're talking about net receipts. So it's all the money that the publisher gets in from selling your book. There should be no deductions for publicity, marketing, artwork, anything like that. And on a similar branch of that, it shouldn't cost you anything. If the publisher is asking you for money, run away screaming. One thing that I love about digital publishers, from publisher to publisher, the consistent thing is that authors tend to be treated a bit more equally. It tends to be a bit more egalitarian, and it's part of that no advance model. At a traditional imprint, I think it's understandable if there's an author with a 6-figure advance and an author with a 10K advance, the publishers need to be thinking about their profit and losses. So a lot of the marketing spend tends to go towards those authors with the big advances and less so to the authors who have smaller advances. But because there isn't that advance inequality, it means that authors tend to be treated a bit more equally, which I love to see. So the common thread is a fairer deal for authors, a focus on those digital formats, and that high royalty rate, no advance model. And it's been great to see lots of different imprints springing up. Canelo was founded in 2015, Booker in 2014. In the last couple of years, Hera and Bulbert have emerged and have been doing really impressive things too. There are also imprints of large publishers like Orion Dash, which is part of Hachette, and HD Digital being part of HarperCollins. So it's worth bearing in mind that digital publishers come in many different shapes and sizes. But I'll talk a little bit about Canelo before I move on, seeing as that's where I am now. So as I've mentioned briefly, it was founded in 2015. The company has since grown to become the largest independent digital-led publisher in Europe. Our founding philosophy was all about finding the best commercial storytelling and bringing it to the widest possible audience, but with a new and fairer deal for authors. So we're super proud of our reputation as being forward-thinking, collaborative, and putting the authors that we work with first and at the forefront of everything we do. And I've spoken a bit about paperback editions. So in 2018, Canelo moved into the print market, where we've now sold well over 2 million paperback editions. So it's worth bearing in mind that digital doesn't mean ebook only. So let's think now about the life of an ebook, seeing as that's the common thread that all these digital publishers share. So an ebook goes through several different phases in the same way a traditional book would. It goes through the editorial process, marketing and publicity, publication day, and post-publication life. Now, various different stages differ by varying degrees compared with a traditional ebook, but we'll start with the editorial process first and foremost. Now, at any reputable digitally focused publisher, it should largely look very similar to the traditional editorial process. And by that, I mean, you'll deliver your book to your editor. It should go through a structural edit, a line edit, a copy edit, and a proofread. It's worth mentioning that at some digital publishers, they might encourage the structural and the line edit to be combined. Some prefer it separated out, but that's worth bearing in mind. I'll just give a quick overview of what these different stages look like. I won't go into too much detail, but just so that you have an understanding of how it works. So with a structural edit, the editor will be looking at big picture things like how different plot elements are working, whether a character arc feels complete, does this ending work, this past tense timeline Are there high enough stakes in it? Are there high enough stakes in the current day timeline? But whereas when we come to the line edit, you're looking at things on a much more microscopic level. So you're thinking, does this sentence structure work? Is this the right word choice? When it comes to the copy edit, now I will say this again and again, a good copy editor is worth their weight in gold. They're brilliant, they're amazing, they're lifesavers. And it's their job to catch what you as the author or the editor might not have spotted. They might say, well, Sandra left the shop at 1 p.m. She can't be in the town centre at 2 p.m. because 5 chapters ago you said it takes 2 hours to get to the town centre. It's that kind of thing, but also looking at things again on a sentence level, checking spelling, punctuation and grammar, making sure sentences flow appropriately, that everything makes sense and is comprehensive. So by the time it gets to proofread, the proofreader is just looking at that top level, those top level things. So spelling, punctuation and grammar, and making sure the manuscript is as perfect as can be before going off to readers. Now, you've got your perfect manuscript, it's been perfectly edited, you're very comfortable that it's wonderful and readers are going to love it, but the author branding is really important. Now we have to think about getting the package and artwork in excellent shape. Now, getting the package right is really crucial for digital publishers. There are different tools available to sell books in physical bookshops, whereas when you're in a virtual store, it's slightly different. In a physical bookshop, you might have a wonderful gold leaf foil on a book that makes it shiny and glimmer and stand out. In a physical bookshop, it might be placed on a display that's in a very advantageous position near the entrance of the bookstore. Online, largely, there are different tools you can use, but largely it comes down to the cover and the copy. Those tend to be the things, once the readers are already on Amazon or Kobo, have typed in they're looking for site thrillers, all you really have at that point is the cover and the copy to sell the book. And this is key because for some digital publishing contracts, it means that final cover approval does sit with the publisher. And this can be quite a big difference compared to traditional publishing. For some imprints in traditional publishing houses, there can be a lot more author input. And it's worth bearing this in mind when thinking about what you want from a publisher. At Canelo specifically, we commission the very best freelance cover designers in the industry. And again, this can be a difference between digital publishing and traditional publishing. Digital publishers tend to work with freelance designers. Sometimes traditional publishers will have a designer who works in-house with them. Now, speaking about Canelo specifically, when it comes to thinking about especially a first book on a contract, what we're really looking to do is establish a strong author brand look with the first novel that can then be carried across to future books. It's really important when we're putting together a package to make sure the genre cues are right. And by that, I mean, if there's a huge historical fiction fan, if they see your cover in an ad or online, they know straight away this is a World War II historical novel. If it's a fan of psych thrillers, they look at the package and they know straight away this is a psychological thriller, this is the right book for me. And there's certain different elements on the package that are contributing to those overall genre cues. Yes, the artwork, also the title, also the strap line, they all play together to make sure those genre cues are really clear and readers know what they're getting. Super, super important. Now, you've got your wonderful manuscript, you've got a brilliant cover, and it's time to think about the tools to sell the book. And this is where things can continue to deviate a bit more from traditional publishing. The tools that digital publishers use to sell their books tend to be a little bit different. So pre-publication, NetGalley is a tool that most ebook publishers use and love. It is a review website whereby readers can request to read a book, an ARC, which is an advanced reading copy before it's released to the public. They can request an ARC, read it, and then hopefully leave a wonderful review on NetGalley, but then also in the future on retailers. And this can end up being really key for things like ads and promotions, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it's a really wonderful tool. Blog tours are also something that ebook publishers tend to love to use. Now, what a blog tour is, when I first heard about blog tours, I didn't really understand the concept. But what happens is that there are wonderful book bloggers. Book bloggers are a really integral part of the book community. And what will happen is a publisher will schedule a certain number of consecutive days where on each day there'll be a book blogger or several bloggers releasing reviews about the book on their website, but also on social media and shouting about it. So it means that there are consecutive days leading up to publication where there are different bloggers shouting about your book and how much hopefully they love it. And it's a really great tool for building a bit of buzz before the book publishes. Now, when it comes to newspaper and magazine reviews, this tends to be something that ebook publishers use less often if it's an ebook only release. If it's a paperback release as well, then it tends to be something that they engage with a little bit more. And it's just because when it comes to ebook sales, there are stronger tools for selling ebooks than those magazine reviews. It tends to be something that publishers like to do a lot for author care because it's wonderful as an author to see your book listed in a magazine. But yeah, they tend to be more effective tools for actually selling books that digital publishers like to focus on. Now, when it comes to selling into retailers, this is something I think digital publishers really excel at. What DG publishers are good at doing is establishing and developing really strong relationships with retailers like Kobo, Apple, and Google Play. And while Amazon is important, and of course publishers will still maintain and develop those relationships, what's great about maintaining those other retailer relationships is that those other retailers are really good at giving the books a bit of extra support on their websites. And as a result, it means that some really meaningful sales can be coming from outside of Amazon. And as wonderful a tool as Amazon is, it's always great to diversify where your sales are coming from and to be able to rely on some other sales too alongside. So let's think a bit about publication day and beyond, and how publishers will be selling your book at that time. So we spoke a little bit about ads. Social media ads are a surprisingly effective tool for selling digital books and digital editions, particularly Facebook ads. They can sell thousands of copies of a book. Now, where I mentioned NetGalley can be really handy is that hopefully NetGalley will mean that you have some great 5-star reviews coming through. And if you can use that text on your ad, it makes the ad much more likely to perform well. So you might have a 5-star review that said, OMG, I couldn't put this book down. Being able to place it on the ad makes readers more likely to click on the advert, and then getting to the retailer page, hopefully lots of those NetGalley reviews have fed through. And if you have lots of positive reviews already on the page around publication, it again means that readers are more likely to buy the book. So that's where NetGalley becomes extra handy. Now, there are tools that publishers like to equip a little bit down the line in terms of giving the book a bit of extra push and a bit of extra visibility. Usually when it comes to price-led promotions, this isn't something we're doing on pub day. It's something that will happen either a few weeks or a few months after the book is published. Now, BookBub is probably the biggest promotional partner. And the way it works, it's a mailing list promo. So BookBub has many different mailing lists filled with readers who have said, I really love crime thrillers. I want you to tell me when crime thrillers are on offer, or I really love clean romance. I want you to tell me when clean romance novels are on offer. And these lists are hundreds of thousands of people strong. And what publishers will do will say, I want to promote this book. I want to drop the price on this book. Will you tell your mailing list fans about it? And BookBub will say yes or no. If they say yes, it can be quite costly for a publisher, but it's a really effective tool. And a great example of how effective it can be, one of the psych thrillers I was working on, we got it at BookBub in the US, and off the back of the BookBub and some smaller promotions, it got to number 2 in the US from that visibility. That's how strong and powerful those promotions are. And it's something that digital publishers are really switched on about. They know that it's worth spending the money on these promotions, and they will be really engaged with making sure your book gets a little bit of an extra push up those charts and more visibility. So, digital publishing, does it work? It's a bit of a loaded question because, of course, I'm going to say yes, but that's because there's some really wonderful examples of digital publishing really working favourably for authors. So I'm going to go through a few of our success stories. So SBK's best-selling psych thriller, I Know Where She Is, was a runaway bestseller for Canelo upon publication, both in the UK and the US, shooting to the top of bestseller charts. It was really widely reviewed, with fans wanting more of Cave's gritty, dilemma-driven narratives to sink their teeth into. Now, Nick Louth is a best-selling author with more than 1 million copies of his novels sold. His books are incredibly popular with readers, with thousands of reviews on Amazon.co.uk with an average of 4.5 stars, which is brilliant. Mary Toyerson's The Closer You Get has been a recent success story for Canelo. It published in ebook and print simultaneously, and we secured bestseller tags on Amazon UK, prime slots across Apple and Kobo worldwide stores, and huge sales through other retailers, including independent bookshops and libraries. It's a great example of longer tail sales Canelo sees as well. So what we often see with our sales pattern is the book performing. This book performed okay on publication, and we entered it into some promotions, and it got a lot of visibility, and those sales rose exponentially and stayed at a really high and brilliant level. Which is great to see. Now, Angela Marston's Silent Scream, it would be remiss of me to talk about digital publishing success stories and not speak about Angie. And the reason why I really love this success story is because it illustrates what digital publishers do quite well, which is fill that gap that can sometimes exist between what readers want and what publishers want. At the time that Angie's novel was being shopped around, it went to almost every traditional publisher going. They went, yeah, it's a great police procedural, but we've seen loads of great police procedurals. Whereas readers were still buying them in their droves. Along came a digital publisher who picked Angie up, and her book went on to sell over 1 million copies, and the series has sold over 4 million copies to date. The artwork has had a bit of revamp in the last year or so. But it's a really brilliant example of bridging that gap between what readers want and what trad publishers are looking for. I am conscious of time, so I'm going to speak very briefly about Chouinard. The reason why I'm going to pull out this case study, she was one of my earliest acquisitions, and it's a really good example of how responsive digital publishers can be. In traditional publishing, it can be more difficult to make changes, but digital publishers tend to offer a higher degree of flexibility. So yeah, let me whiz through this because there's lots more to talk through. We found this novel through PitMad. PitMad is a Twitter pitch contest whereby writers can tweet a pitch of their novel, and editors or agents who are interested in reading the manuscript will like the pitch and it'll be sent in. So I spotted Michelle's tweet, liked it, she sent it to me, thought it was brilliant. We were really looking for a new police procedural that would break out. We tried a bit of art that we thought was creative, new, different. The book wasn't really selling much of anything. So what we did was we changed the package. The sales slowly increased, thought this could still be doing better. We changed the copy, sales slightly increased, we still thought this could be doing better. So we entered it into a few price-led promotions, and this is where BookBub, the reviews have become quite crucial. So this didn't have enough reviews on it to qualify for a BookBub. Because BookBub is so effective, it's really competitive. So we entered it into some smaller price-led promotions. It shot to the top of the charts and it stayed there. It became a top 100 bestseller in the US in ebook, and also became a top 15 bestseller in print. And that was off the back of POD, I should say. So this book at the time only had a print on demand edition. It is now having a mass market paperback release in May, but it's gone on to sell hundreds of thousands of copies in POD as well as in E, which has ended up being really lucrative for the author. Right, so let's talk a bit more about getting your foot in the door. If you think digital publishing sounds like a good idea or something that could be right for you, I'm sure
Hello, we seem to have lost Leodora's connection momentarily. I'm just going to remove the spotlight and see if she is still with us. Hello, Leodora. She has disappeared. But she has the link, so she's hopefully going to log straight back in. I'm afraid that does sometimes happen. There might be a connection issue. One of the TLC team is going to get in touch with her with that link to log back in. Hopefully she will be joining us in a couple of minutes. But thank you everyone in the meantime for your questions, which we will be going through shortly with, hopefully with Leodora with us. Some of these I've noticed have already been answered through the presentation thus far. So we will just try to get to as many that haven't yet been answered as possible, because you have got some brilliant questions so far. Will the slides be available in the replay is just one that I can answer now, which is yes, absolutely. They will. All of these recordings with the captions and transcripts, etc., will be uploaded. Leodora seems to be joining us again. Hello, Leodora. I think you're on mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right, apologies for that. I'm not quite sure what my computer decided it was doing. I've restarted.
No problem.
With you.
I am going to re-spotlight you.
Fantastic, and I'm going to reshare my screen and hopefully get through the rest of the presentation without any fun surprises. It's always great when technology decides to be creative with how it operates. Here we go.
I've just had a couple of requests, just if you wouldn't mind slowing the pace down a tiny bit, so that it's a lot of information, a lot of fascinating, brilliant information.
All right, brilliant. I'll speak a bit more slowly. I think I'm too keen to rush through everything to make sure there's time for questions, so I'll go a bit more slowly. So let's talk a bit about getting your foot in the door. So you've decided this might be something that's right for you. The question I get asked quite often is, do you need an agent? Now, many imprints are open to unagented subs when it comes to digital publishing, which is slightly different to traditional publishers. At my old imprint, I would say the split on the list was maybe 50-50 agented to unagented authors. My current imprint, I would say probably only around 20% of the authors are unagented, and that's because we are currently close to submissions. I think if you are unagented, digital publishers can be a really great option for you. For one, it's just fewer barriers to entry. You only have to get your manuscript past an editor rather than past an agent and then an editor. But I do think there are some brilliant things to be said for having an agent. I think first and foremost, particularly if you're a debut, it can be really great feeling confident that there's someone in your corner who understands the ins and outs of the business, particularly thinking about contracts. The best kind of agent will be knowledgeable enough to help you write the best book and get the best deal. It's also worth bearing in mind, if you find a great agent, that's hopefully quite a long-term relationship for you as an author. And that means that if your editor changes, your editor is more likely to change than your agent. Editors move from imprint to print or publishing house to publishing house. So having an agent there means that if there is a change, you still have that constant presence there, and it feels less disruptive. It becomes a lot more important to know if you click with your editor, if you don't have an agent, because they end up filling that agent role and there's a lot more contact with them. But having said all of this, it's worth mentioning that there is less room for negotiating at digital publishers when it comes to contracts. And that's because royalty rates are already high, so they tend to be fixed. So agented and unagented authors on the whole tend to be getting the same deal. On the whole, though, I'd say an excellent agent is always worth having. A mediocre one, if you're looking to be published digitally, it's worth thinking about because you want to consider whether you want to be giving away a portion of your royalties to someone else. And a bad agent, I'd say always stay away from. Not all agents are created equal, but also, to be fair, not all editors are created equal. And without an agent, I would say be sure you have an editor who's going to throw themselves behind you and your work with lots of energy and enthusiasm and be your champion. So in terms of your actual submission and getting an editor at a digital publisher to pick your book up, what do you need? Now I'm slightly giving away my trade secrets here or my own winning tactic when it comes to buying books, but it's the hook. You need to have a really brilliant hook for your novel. It's a really competitive market, both digitally and in print, and it's important that your novel stands out. So your pitch or your hook might revolve around a hooky dilemma, for example. So the dilemma might be your life or your unborn child's, how do you choose? Or your pitch might revolve around an intriguing crime. So two women enter a lift, when the door opens, one is dead. The woman says it's suicide, do we believe her? So that's the kind of thing you need to be thinking about. Can you distill the idea of your novel into a sentence or two, making it sound really exciting? So beyond that, I know it might sound really obvious and painfully so, but beyond that, if you've got a brilliant hook, it's just really important to make sure that writing stacks up behind it. You can have the most incredible hook in the world, the most commercial sounding book in the world. But as an editor, what editors want is to be able to spend lots of time and love and attention on all of their authors. And if a manuscript seems like it's going to take a lot of attention away from other authors because of the level of work it requires, that's something that's going to make an editor stop and think. Now, it might sound surprising, but big picture issues tend to be a little bit less scary to an editor for fixing compared to those small scale things. Now, when I say big picture issues, I'm talking about structural things. Of course, you want your novel to be as structurally sound as possible, and ideally it will be structurally wonderful. But if, for example, a plot thread might need considering, a character arc might need changing, maybe the end needs to be changed up slightly, or a plot thread in a past tense thread needs to be slightly tweaked. Those are bigger things in terms of the scope, but it's a lot easier for an editor to step back and say, okay, that's what we need to fix, and feel confident that that can be done. If you're looking at things on a sentence by sentence level, like purple prose, and by purple prose, I'm talking about things that language that's very overwritten, or spelling, punctuation, and grammar issues, that becomes a lot more challenging for an author or an editor to look past. So it's worth bearing in mind. Get on a sentence by sentence level, make sure your spelling, punctuation, and grammar is as tip-top as possible. Make sure your sense of voice feels clear and accessible. Those are things to really think about, as well as the big picture things. Now, I'm conscious of time. Tech quality has slightly taken a bit of time away from us, but I do want to talk very briefly about self-publishing. It would feel remiss of me to talk about digital publishing and not talk about self-publishing, because at the same time that imprints like Canelo and Booker were springing up, there were self-published authors coming to market who are doing a really impressive job. So it's worth thinking about. So let's talk very briefly about some of the advantages of self-publishing and disadvantages. I think the biggest advantage is clear. You get to keep all of your money to yourself. You're not giving any of your money away to a digital publisher or to an agent. It's all yours and in your hands. Another wonderful thing is that you have total creative control over your branding. I mentioned that for some digital publishers, they will have final approval over your artwork and your title, but that's not something that you'd have to worry about if you were self-publishing. The disadvantages, it is a lot of hard work focusing on publishing strategy or working on publishing strategy for a book. Thinking about the marketing, publicity, the advertising, it's a lot. And what it means is that there's less time to focus on your writing. And it tends to be the writing that writers want to spend their energy on. So it's worth bearing in mind. The other thing to consider are the upfront costs. It's going to cost money to get a jacket designer. I would always strongly recommend getting a good designer. I know we say don't judge a book by its cover, but having worked in publishing, I can see that there's a direct relationship between quality of cover and sales. The best designers I work with charge £1,000 for artwork design. And there are designers who are also brilliant that I can't work with because they charge twice that. So it's worth bearing in mind. I would also strongly recommend still getting editorial work done, professional editorial work done on the book. At the very least, a copy edit and a proofread, which together could cost about £900, depending on the length of the book. I would also think a structural edit is advisable. So you can see that there are costs stacking up here. You also have to think about advertising the book, and you could easily spend £50 a day on ads. So before you know it, £1,000, £2,000, £3,000 is quickly gone. And it's worth bearing in mind that BookBub, which is a brilliant tool, and I really advise people to use it, it is expensive for a very popular category. If you're doing a BookBub worldwide, it can cost £900, £1,000. Again, worth bearing in mind. I think we've got a bit of time to talk about some of the success stories here. So I just wanted to put out some authors who've been doing a really brilliant job self-publishing. LJ Ross, as you can see on her cover, she's quite loudly shouted about being a multi-million best-selling author. Holly Martin used to be published by a digital imprint and then went into self-publishing and has been doing really well for herself with her books entering the top 50. AJ McDean is part of a husband and wife writing duo. Her husband is AJ Wills, and they both write psych thrillers. And something they've started doing is entering their books into KU and seeing them really doing well, getting to the top 20 in the book charts. And AJ Wills is his wife's sisters got into the top 5. And I think a really wonderful and heartwarming success story is Nicola May's The Corner Shop in Cocklebury Bay. And again, she's done a great job of shouting about her success on her cover. You can see she's said it's a #1 bestseller, but not only was it a #1 bestseller when it was released in 2019, it stayed at that #1 spot for weeks on end. So thinking again about the advantages, these authors get to keep all of their profits. I know they're all very hardworking when it comes to marketing and publicity, and they do spend a lot on that too, but it's another path that's worth considering and worth thinking about. All right, brilliant. Now, I think in my keenness to get through all of the wonderful bits of information that I've packed into this presentation, I've sped ahead. So I'd love to hear a few questions from everyone who's been watching, and thank you for listening to me talk at you for over half an hour.
Thank you so much, Leodora. There's been so much information here. And for those of you who joined us a little bit later because of the portal issues, we have now emailed everybody those links. Hopefully everything is back up and running. We do apologize. This is the first time we've used the portal, so there were unfortunately some issues. We are working on an apology package, so look out for some goodies coming your way a bit later in the day. But questions, Leodora, we have so many in the Q&A. A couple have been answered already, so if I gloss over yours, I do apologise. Partly it's time and partly it's because Leodora has addressed some of this in the presentation. And just a reassurance to everyone, everything, as we say, will be recorded and uploaded to the video library, and we'll remind everybody about access and so on with all of our follow-up emails. Straight to the questions, Leodora, after that fantastic presentation. The first one's from Nicolette, who says, because it's a shared risk model, does that make a digital publisher more inclined to take a risk on new writers or books that are not an obvious win?
In short, sometimes yes. Yes, because a publisher isn't having to put forward £10,000 plus on an advance, it means they can take some risks. Some digital publishers are more risk averse, but I definitely see digital imprints taking a chance on some books to see if they can create a new bestseller and interest in an area they've not previously explored or might feel a bit more risky.
Fantastic. And then we've had a few questions from, I think, 3 or 4 writers actually in here. So I'm not going to name you all, but we've got a few questions on, you've talked about the hook, you've talked about kind of book club fiction, genre cues, etc. There's a lot of reasons why commercial fiction seems to work in the digital sphere. Do you also look at literary fiction? And if you don't, why do you think that is, that in this particular context? Does it not sell? Is it just not what you're looking for?
We do look at book club fiction in a limited scope. Book club fiction is definitely something that digital publishers publish and are interested in. It still comes down to, if it's a bit more upmarket, it still needs to have a good hook. So there's usually there are many more conversations at the publisher about how to market the book. So a good example would be The Missing Letters of Mrs. Bright. Back when I was at Bookershaw, there were so many conversations about how do we start. This is a book club book. This is very well written, but we need to still think about how we connect this to readers and make it feel like that's something they have to pick up. So we thought, what is the thing about this book that might, draw readers towards it? And that's why we pulled out the hook of The Missing Letters in the title. It still needs to be about communicating the story really clearly, and there still needs to be a distinctive hook within the book, even if it is more upmarket to pull out. I think where things become very literary, no, but digital publishers don't tend to focus on very literary books, and that's because they just feel a bit less accessible. There's just by their nature, there's just a slightly smaller audience who are looking for them. And I should say that it doesn't mean that with commercial books, there's not a focus on the writing quality too. They can be extremely well written. You can think about language, style, and voice. But just if something is extremely literary, and I mean if the whole book is one sentence, we know that some readers will go, that scares me, and we might want books to be scary if they're thrillers, but we don't want to scare readers in that sense.
And you've presumably cultivated a particular readership with particular tastes, as each publisher does, with things that Canelo is known for, or things that Weidenfeld and Nicholson might be known for.
100%. And, while I do think there is some responsibility for a publisher to always be looking at reaching new audiences, there is a certain degree of, confidence in knowing that there is a pre-existing audience for that publisher that they know that they can reach.
Great. I hope that's answered your questions, those 3 or 4 people in the Q&A. Dina asks, you used some impressive sales results. You mentioned some impressive sales results for fiction during your presentation. Do you have any thoughts about how non-fiction sales fare digitally?
That's an excellent question. The publishers that I have had experience with, publishers who I know their editorial staff with, they tend to only have just started looking at nonfiction in the digital space. So I don't have very impressive figures for nonfiction in digital publishing yet. I think it feels a bit more experimental. I'm sorry, that's probably not as fulsome an answer as you were looking for. I'd say digital publishers are increasingly interested in it, especially because nonfiction does very well in audio, it's worth mentioning. But it feels newer for the publishers that I'm aware of anyway.
Great, that's fantastic, thank you. Aruna, so you mentioned in your presentation the value of agents and how that process works in brief, and of course in the afternoon anyone in this webinar will know that we've got our pitching sessions where we'll be put into groups specifically to look at that process. But Aruna is interested in the split of writers who come to you via different channels. So that might be via open submissions, it might be agents, and it might be, as you were talking about earlier with Michelle, through you kind of approaching writers. Can you talk a bit about the split between the different channels?
Yes, I think where publishers are open to submissions, so if I'm thinking about being back at Bookershaw, the split was a little bit wider. Canelo, because we are currently only open to agent submissions, most of the submissions come through that channel. I have been getting the editors to engage with things like PitMad, which I spoke about, but also DVPit. And DVPit is very similar to PitMad, but it's for writers from underrepresented backgrounds. So they will tweet pictures for their work, and then agents and editors will like and favorite those pictures, and then the authors will send them their manuscript. So at the moment with Canelo, I'd say it's 90% agented, just agented submissions that we're getting, and then some of these Twitter pitch submissions as well. At other publishers like Bookershaw, it's much more open. I'd say maybe it's a 70% unagented inbox submissions coming in compared to 30% agented, and it ends up being 50-50 in terms of representation there. But there are also wonderful things that I know that I've been running, and also Bookshop have been running, like open courses for submissions with partnerships like Spread the Word. But again, this will be specifically for writers from underrepresented backgrounds, and we will do a special like call out for certain genres from certain writers. So it's another avenue for finding manuscripts. I hope that answers.
We've just had a couple of people asking in the chat actually what those platforms were. I've just added this to the chat. So PitMad and DV Pit, for those asking, that is in the chat for you, and we will also continue to pop resources and things mentioned in the chat as they come up. And yes, I can. Attendees are already answering their own questions, so thank you to all of you for answering each other's questions. Where are we in the questions? Oh yes, so I mean we've sort of covered this, but I'm interested in case maybe you've already answered this in fact, which is basically book club, more commercial stuff. But digital publishing in general, Robin is interested in. It seems to be more successful with certain genres. Could you tell us, I guess, give us a list so that we know? Because you've mentioned book club and generally commercial. Is it all there, do you think?
Do you know? Yes, I think so. I think the interesting thing is that it might look like digital publishing is works best for, say, a very specific genre, but the interesting thing is, I'll speak more specifically. So, for example, psychological thrillers, you can often see them getting to the top of the bestseller charts. Usually when it's on a price-led promotion like an Amazon daily deal where it's dropped to 99p, or it's just been dropped after publication, or it's had a book bug. But it's worth mentioning that there are other commercial genres that you don't see at the top of those bestseller lists as often, but are performing usually at a higher price point quite consistently. For example, historical fiction, World War II set historical fiction and saga fiction sells exceptionally well to digital publishers, also in print. And they tend to sometimes be at an ever so slightly higher price point and have a longer tail of sales. I think sometimes we can get distracted by what's in the top 50 or the top 100, but it's worth bearing that in mind. I'd say crime thrillers will always do well for digital publishers. I'd say police procedurals are increasingly hard to make work. I think finally we might be getting to the point where readers are still loving it, but looking more to those brand name authors. It's harder to break out a new author in that area. Psych thrillers, if you've got a great pitch, it doesn't matter if you're debut or established, readers will buy it. Romance works really well, especially if it's like escapist holiday romance in the UK. It works slightly less well in the US, and that's because, again, readers tend to go towards either brand or self-published brand authors who've already kind of cornered the market. Book club fiction, although we've discussed literary fiction not being as popular with publishers, book club fiction with a good hook can do exceptionally well, and it's definitely something that digital publishers are looking for increasing amounts of. And I'm wondering if there's anything I've not touched on here that's important. I would say one thing that digital publishers sometimes struggle with is sci-fi and fantasy. That is something I will say. And YA. It tends to be focused on the adult fiction and the adult side of the market. And I think I've covered almost everything. I'm just making sure I've not forgotten anything.
No, that's very comprehensive. And actually, a segue from that, Guy has asked a question about things that are a bit stuck between genres, perhaps. So you mentioned the increased importance of genre cues. Does that, asks Guy, make it harder to sell anything that does not have an obvious genre home, whether that be digitally or more generally?
I mean, the short answer is yes. And that's something that often will be discussed in an acquisitions meeting at a publisher, digital publisher. It's where does this sit? And if it's difficult to get it to sit somewhere, then usually the sales team becomes a bit nervous about it. And I think every editor has probably picked up a passion project at some point that doesn't quite sit in a clear genre, and it does tend to struggle a little bit. And it's because it's harder to get those genre cues to shout clearly. Sometimes it might be a case of editing the manuscript so it sits more comfortably somewhere, but if it just can't, then it's worth saying that, yeah, it makes it trickier for us.
Okay. Mark has said, I'm really interested to hear that PitMad has worked for someone. I can sense a subtext. What would Leodora recommend to writers to make their PitMad tweets more successful? And what else can writers be doing to attract digital publishers? So not attract them as you know, I guess, how do you make your pitch? And we'll be doing this in the pitch sessions in more detail, but if you're doing a PitMad, which is new to some people in the room, so please do join in and find it on Twitter, how do you make that in such a limited space feel appealing?
I think because there are so many tweets going out, it feels a little bit like looking at going into TK Maxx. There's so much wonderful things, so many wonderful things to kind of sort through. I'd say that the comps, using comp titles, and it doesn't have to be a book, it could be a film.
Just in case anyone's unclear what comp titles, I think it's comparison titles, so similar titles to the book that you're writing taken from contemporary fiction or non-fiction.
Thank you. So yes, those are really helpful as an editor to see. And like I say, it doesn't have to be another book. You might say it's a bit like, well, actually, all the Netflix series I'm now thinking of were books first and foremost, but it might be a Netflix series. So often what writers will do, they'll put those comps, they'll say X meets X in capital letters. And straight away, if you're looking for something in a certain genre as an editor, you'll pick up on that and you'll read that pitch in a lot more detail. Use things that are really big and bestsellers. We use things that are recognizable names, I would say. Also make use of the genre hashtags. So PitMad on the website, they will list certain hashtags you can use to describe the genre of the book that you're writing in, and editors will often filter by those hashtags, again, because of the volume of tweets. So I think those two things are worth bearing in mind.
Great. Okay, so Rich has a question. When it comes to cover design, I think this is quite a big question, but we'll try and keep it succinct. When it comes to cover design, genres tend to have specific styles to appeal to readers. Is there ever a time when you feel it's better to make a cover different to the usual style, so the usual genre style, in order to stand out, particularly for an author who's new to a genre?
I think, if anything, for an author who's new to a genre, it tends to be more important to make sure those genre cues are there, because they don't have an existing fan base who knows what to expect from them. Interestingly enough, I think, again, at every editor's career, they've gone, let's do this differently. And usually, so M.M. Chouinard is an example. That cover, we wanted to do something a bit different with it, and it just didn't work. I think the challenge is finding those clear genre cues while trying to keep it fresh. So one of the covers I've recently worked on it's called The Nurse by J.A. Corrigan. It's a psych thriller, and I think it's clearly a psych thriller. It does look a bit book clubby, but it was trying to find a point of difference. So I think for publishers and for authors, the important thing is making sure those cues are clear, but yes, also finding a point of difference.
Rich, I hope that answers your question. And there's a whole other session to be had on why covers get grouped in particular ways and how far it's useful in some ways as a cue, and in other ways, particularly when we're talking about kind of representation and inclusivity, how that can be quite restrictive. But it's not the session for now, perhaps another one. So Artie's got a question. Artie, I think there might be a typo in here, so I'll read it and hopefully it still makes sense. I see a lot of issues when it comes to disabled writers trying to get in their foot in the door as soon as they are, Artie, you've said transparent, but I'm not sure what you mean there. Do you have any tips for disabled writers wanting to get into digital publishing?
Yes, I suppose my advice tends to be similar for authors. I mean, I do a lot of work in terms of trying to increase representation of writers from underrepresented backgrounds across all spectrums. And I think it still comes down to writing something that feels authentic to you, not what feels authentic to publishers. It's writing the story that you want to tell, and also still trying to think about pulling out. I'd still advise once you've written your story, thinking, okay, what are the exciting elements of this that I want to pull out, and making sure that you communicate that really clearly in your pitch letters, your cover query letters that are going out to agents or publishers if you're submitting directly. I think it's telling the story that you want to tell, but then thinking about the exciting things that you can pull out from that. I hope that is a good enough answer, but focus on writing what you want, and yeah, just don't give up, keep sharing. Again, this is the same advice I give to writers always: write from your heart and persevere. I think sometimes it takes a few rejections to get there, but I like to think that you will eventually.
And we will also share on the forum once I think we've just discovered, the tech team has discovered it might be the forum that has caused the issues on the portal, which is now working absolutely fine. So we've had to temporarily disable it. But what we will do once it's back up and running is also filter any resources through to the portal that might be relevant to questions asked in today's session. So for example, we work in partnership with literature organisations that specifically support disabled writers. We'll put some links in there, and we'll put some links to other things as well. We've had a few questions. We're just in the last stretch of questions. We've had a few questions about digital publishing. Is it kind of I'm amalgamating your questions, writers, into one, so I do apologise if I've missed anything, but this has come up a few times. Is digital publishing a kind of first stage, so somebody is referenced, you know, having an ebook and eventually moving on to print, or is it something that you see as a model that can live separately from print?
This is interesting because at the current publisher I work at, ebook and print is very much intertwined. But I will say for the writers I've worked with in the past, it's definitely not a first step. For writers who have been published in with PODs, for example, and audio simultaneously, it's the writing model that works for them. So I'm thinking about authors like Angela Marston's and DK Hood, who really love writing commercially and also like writing pacily. No other model would suit them the way digital publishing does. No other model would give them the royalties that digital publishing does. I think when you are successful under the digital model, the money you are making is very nice, in short. So it's very much not a stepping stone. It's about what suits, you know, it's like choosing what clothes to wear. It's what fits you and yourself most appropriately.
We have a few questions from writers who are writing either children's or middle grade. You've mentioned that YA tends not to do as well in the digital sphere, but I don't think we've mentioned children's and middle grade. Is there space for it there, or is it as yet untested? What's it looking like?
I would say it's as yet untested. I think the instinct that publishers have is that fiction that beyond the adult category, so YA or middle grade, just doesn't sell as well in digital formats. I'm not sure how thoroughly that's been interrogated as a theory, and I'm sure that some digital publishers are eventually going to put that to the test, but at the moment it's not something that digital publishers are looking at.
Okay, fine. A quick question here, a very short question here. How many authors does Canelo take on each year? And I wonder if I can add to that question and ask, because this is always something that interests me and I ask agents a lot. How many submissions do you have? And of those, how many do end up published, roughly?
I honestly couldn't tell you how many submissions we get. We're slightly independent because the way we operate at Canelo, every different editor has a very different genre focus. Mm-hmm. So our inboxes are all a little bit different when it comes to submissions. I have looked at my acceptance stats in the past before, and I think I take on like 0.5% of my submissions.
0.5%.
Yeah, which is small. But that's bearing in mind that I do participate quite heavily in things like PitMad. Encourage open submissions as far as possible. I'm sorry to not be able to give a more wider.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's really useful to know, and you know, it's something that we know. So we think the average across the industry is about 0.9%, just from our research. So that's roughly in line. But sometimes writers are surprised to hear that.
Yeah. I think there was also a question about how many books authors we take on a year. Was there?
Yes. Yeah.
On that, again, I can only speak to myself as an editor where I currently am, but I say I have about 12 frontlist books in the year for 2021. Probably wouldn't go above 20. At Bookature, usually the total count is around 20 per editor, but at Bookature, it's worth bearing in mind that some authors are delivering 3 books a year. So yeah, hopefully that helps contextualize.
Yeah, it really, really does. Okay, so we are 2 minutes from the end of this session. I should also mention before we wrap up, I'm going to just see if there are so many questions. We've got 48 questions, so thank you so much, everybody, for inputting. Before I get to the last question, which I'll pick in a moment, I did want to share with you, Leodora, that throughout the chat, we've had so many people saying, so thank you so much for such an insightful presentation, for your input, and writers saying we really, really want to let you know that we've really enjoyed this and there's been so much to learn. So I did want to mention that. Okay, so let's go through and pick the final golden question. Let's make it a good one. And I do apologise that we can't get around to everyone's, but there are some things that I think have now been covered off. There are a few questions about pitching, and we will answer that, I think, in the afternoon session, so do forgive me if I don't get to those. One question about POD, that just means print on demand, which means as and when somebody wishes to print it, rather than having a full print run of hundreds or thousands of books, as and when somebody wants it, and it's a slightly higher unit price. Oh, and then upfront costs. Leodora has already covered this. There shouldn't be any upfront costs with any publisher. No publisher should be charging you. There's something about, okay, let's, oh, what are your, this is interesting. Oh, let's finish on this final question, because I've seen this, well, maybe I'm wrong. I've seen this in digital publishing, pseudonyms or kind of just use of initials.
Yes.
Is this
yes.
a trend? Is this to do with genre?
That's a good question. For some authors, it's a case of personal preference. Sometimes it's to do with IP. So for some IP projects, the publisher will pick a name, and that means that from book to book, there might be a slightly different author working on the book, but the names are picked by the publisher. I see it a lot, particularly in psychological fiction. I can't tell you why, if I'm being honest. I think by the time a few people have done it and been successful, there's a bit of a lean towards it. For some of our authors, if they're male and they're writing female characters, they do like to go by initials. Similarly, if a female author is writing something that people consider more like hardcore or boysy, they might choose to use initials, but by and large, sometimes it's a case of authors wanting to protect their personal identity or separate that from their writing. Yeah.
It's one of the mysteries, but probably trend-based. We're not completely sure. We have come to the end of our first session. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Leodora, for such an amazing presentation, for such generosity and just a wealth of information. I really hope that you've all taken away lots to think about and mull over, and that you can maybe consider digital publishing as one of the options. We always tell writers through TLC to be open to all pathways, because really it's about pathways to readership more than it is about modes of publication that we should be thinking about. Leodora, thank you. We're going to let Leodora go, but we're going to keep this window open. So what that will mean is you can either log out and use the same link to log back in at 11:05 when the second session will start, or you can simply switch off your audio and video and go wander around, have a cup of tea or whatever you need. We will be switching over captioners, so you probably do want to mute and not listen to me doing that. But thank you for being here. Thank you for your forbearance just with that first 10 minutes of glitches. And thank you, Leodora. This has been a fascinating first session for the TLC Online Writers' Day. And we will see you all in 8 minutes at 11:05.
Right, it's been totally my pleasure. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day.
Hello, Joanne. I think we're just going to have participants listening to us switching over. Are you there, Joanne?
Morning, no problem.
Morning. Hello. Okay, I am going to somehow switch you over as the captioner. Oh, here we go. Maria, I'm just withdrawing your captioning now.
I will leave now. Thank you, Aki.
Thank you, Maria.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I've got that now, Aki. Thank you.
You got it? Wonderful.
Yes. Thank you.
I just wanted to jump on and say hello, everyone that's here. Thank you so much for your patience with the tech issues this morning. I understand there's been some difficulties. Regarding the forum, as Aki mentioned, we've decided to keep it, I just seen there's a question about it there. We've decided to keep it down for the rest of the morning session, just because we're worried that might be the cause of some of the issues we were having. But we will try and get it up again for the afternoon sessions for the breakouts. Thank you again for your patience with that.
Hi, Maria. We are just in the break now. So we'll be reconvening at 11:05. Participants are off having a cup of tea and the rest, and we are just We've just switched over. Your captioner will be Joanne, who is on screen here.
Oh, lovely.
And we'll
Hey.
be starting at 5 past. We are back. It is 11:05. We have changed captioners, and we are here with Maria Garbutt-Lucero, the Publicity Director at Sphere. Maria, are you able to switch your video on for us?
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Well, all right, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our second session of the TLC Online Writers' Day. Do join us on social media at the hashtag Online Writers' Day to share your comments, and of course continue to use the chat here. We had a couple of questions from the last session about the raise hand function. So throughout this session, I will spotlight Maria as I did Leodora. She will make her presentation, and we will leave time at the end for questions. If you have questions, you can use the Q&A button on the bottom right-hand side of your screen to ask a question. We will see the question and we will answer those in the Q&A at the end. The chat is for general comments, things that you are interested in. We'll pop resources or things mentioned by Maria into the chat. So please use those two functions during this session. The raise hand function, it's just if you raise your hand and you want to ask a question with audio, the raise hand function allows you to do that. Depending on how many questions we get, we will try and use that function at the end of this session. But if we get lots of questions, as we did with Leodora's, then I will just go through them. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Maria, our second speaker of the day. We're so glad you can join us, Maria. This is DIY Publicity. So Maria is an award-winning publicist and now publicity director at Sphere, which is an imprint of Hachette. And she will be taking you through exactly what publicity is and how you can apply some publicity strategies to sort of help you as a writer and your projects. Without further ado, I am going to spotlight Maria, and I'm going to hand over to you, Maria.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming, and thanks Aki for inviting me. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've got over 10 years experience working across literary imprints at Penguin, Random House, Vintage, Faber, and now Hachette. And today what I'm hoping to impart are some of the things I've learned along the way that can help you on your journey to publication, but also help hopefully inspire some ideas for when it comes to promoting your own books on a budget. I'd also like to give you an insight into sort of the machinery behind the whole publication process, because I know it can be quite mystifying and opaque from the outside. I'll also discuss a couple of case studies of authors I've worked with to illustrate my points, and also tell you about how I've applied these principles to my own extracurricular projects with my Filipino supper club, Baboy Club. And I guess first to start, I'm going to share my screen. A moment, sorry. Is that working for everyone?
Yep, we can see that.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it to full screen. Gosh, sorry, do you remember where the button is?
Yeah, absolutely. At the top where it says slideshow, insert design transitions animation slideshow.
Oh, there we go. Sorry,
Yeah,
thanks.
and then from beginning, there we go.
Okay, great. So a quick note on the difference between marketing and publicity. We work very closely together to find the audience for books buyers. And an old and simple distinction between the two departments was marketing is promotion that you pay for. So, you know, advertising in newspapers or on the radio or on TV, billboards that you'll see in train stations, kind of point of sale merchandise at, you know, bookshops, like those dump bins full of books, things like that. And then publicity is all of the promotion that isn't paid for. So getting the book reviewed in the newspapers, or getting authors talking at literary festivals about their books and into signings afterwards, you know, meet the audience. So whenever I start a campaign, I always think, who is the ideal reader for the book? Who's most likely to buy it, and how do I reach them? So I think about my print targets, my online targets for sort of coverage, you know, placing features, reviews, extracts, interviews with the author. That can be like summer books reading lists and book of the year lists at the end of the year, things like that. Now in the digital age, there's a bit more of a blurring between publicity and marketing, because we're all kind of trying to find social media influencers who will be shouting about the book online and helping to build buzz and excitement ahead of publication. So the other thing like marketing would do would be creating sort of merchandise. So I've got, over the years, I've sort of accumulated so much merchandise thanks to the creativity of my colleagues in marketing. So see this like normal people wrapping paper that we wrap the books in before we sent them to editors, you know, thousands of tote bags in my drawers, normal people mugs that we sent to people who'd really championed Sally Rooney's debut novel, Conversations with Friends. I've got dozens of these Irvine Welsh A Decent Ride t-shirts that have handily come in useful as sort of pajama tops for me and my friends over the years. And as a publicist, I guess one of my main roles is I'm a cheerleader for the book. I'm kind of the one shouting about it to the media, trying to get literary editors interested and agreeing to review it. So I'm really thinking about sort of concise ways to convey the message of the book without them, you know, just kind of tempting them to read on, basically. And then as part of the publishing team, I'm advising on the audiences that we're trying to find for it. And I plan national tours with events, bookshops, literary festivals, signings, that kind of thing. I'm building relationships with media and making connections between them and the author. And occasionally I'm a therapist as well when things go wrong. But the main bulk of what I do, you know, as I said, is trying to find the people who will buy the book via book reviews and interviews. And then a thing that I really enjoy about my job is kind of curating events. And this is sort of my opportunity to kind of think about who are my dream pairings for authors? Who would I love to hear in conversation with Zadie Smith? And I was able to set up an event where Diana Evans interviewed her. And then I was working with Emily Pine on her memoir, Notes to Self, 2 years ago. And I managed to pair her with Gia Tolentino, author of Trick Mirror. She's a writer from The New Yorker. And we got Octavia Bright, who's a co-host of a brilliant literary podcast called Literary Fiction, to interview. So it's, you know, drawing different people together, and you know, Zadie Smith will have a specific audience and Diana Evans will have her own fans, and then you bring them together, and that's kind of a, you know, a really rich, interesting conversation, sparking off ideas of each other, and also their different sort of fans are coming together and sort of celebrating both of their work. So I've worked with prize-winning novelists like Booker Prize winner Anna Burns and Orhan Pamuk, who won the Nobel Prize. But what I really love doing is, you know, building the profile for debut novelists, because that's sort of, you know, people at the start of their career, and, you know, the general public have no idea who they are. And I'm kind of trying to find the journalists who will want to write about the book in media, and then festivals who will want to promote their books. And it's like a real exciting challenge at the beginning of someone's career. And these are sort of a range of the authors that I've worked with: Frances Cha, Sally Rooney, Avni Doshi, who was shortlisted for the Booker last year, and Edouard Louis. And I think part of the work in building someone's profile, that can begin even before you've been published, even before you have an agent. So you can, you know, start pitching articles to places like The Stinging Fly, The White Review, or short stories to The Stinging Fly. And there are also a range of prizes for emerging writers, like the Sunday Times Short Story Award and the Guardian Fourth Estate BAME Short Story Prize. And a fun fact about that one is that was actually a debut novelist who started it as Candice Carty-Williams back when she was on the publishing side of things before she became this multi-best-selling author of Queenie. Oh, sorry. And last year I had the great pleasure of working on Dolly Parton's Songteller, David Mitchell's #1 best-selling Utopia Avenue, and then The Girl with the Louding Voice, which is the debut novel of Abi Dare, who you'll be seeing later today. This is proof. So what I think is really, really important is how do you tell the story of who you are as a writer? And probably like an ickier way of saying that is building your personal brand. Because of course, there's all sorts of things that you can do to promote a book and get it noticed when you have a publicist and a marketing team and the luxury of a marketing budget and a publishing house behind you. For instance, you know, I've toured the country with Irvin Welsh in a sort of customized black cab for his book, A Decent Ride. And then for a book called The Knowledge by Lewis Dartnell, which was a popular science book about how to survive the apocalypse, we vacuum packed proof copies of the book to send to literary editors because we wanted to like playfully grab at their attention and sort of tell a quick little shorthand story about the book. And then that kind of generated buzz because people were sort of surprised to receive this vacuum packed proof that would tell them how to survive any apocalyptic situation. And then that, you know, it gets the book seen elsewhere, and it's not just the key. I think a key role for the publisher is to get other people talking about the book, not just us, because I think, you know, people in the public know that we're trying to sell the book. So what we really need to do is generate excitement outside of our bubble. But what's the path to success before you're signed and a superstar with a publishing budget? The first thing that I really think is helpful is building your biography. And that needs to tell a story about who you are and what you write. So in other words, you know, conveying your personal brand, because it's the way that agents will pitch you to editors at publishing houses. And those editors will then take your book proposal to acquisition meetings to be read across the department. And then they'll get feedback from their colleagues in sales, marketing, publicity, editorial. And we all kind of come together and discuss how viable it is to sell and can we find an audience for it. So your biography is really a shorthand way of expressing, you know, either I'm a literary writer with an interest in sci-fi or queer retellings of classical myths, or I'm a historian with academic credentials and I specialize in sort of military history. So it's kind of about tying your name to the certain institutions that tell that narrative. And so to some extent, it's identifying what genre is your book, because, you know, if it's literary fiction or non-fiction, crime, thriller, romance, sci-fi, at the end of that process, once it's bought and turned into a physical object, the sort of the generic conventions sort of mean that it kind of defines where it will end up in a bookshop. It's all kind of this whole sort of pipeline from the beginning of acquisition to actual publication. So I think a useful exercise would be to sort of reverse engineer that. If you look at your favorite books and think about your favorite authors, you know, get the books off your shelves and have a look at the back flap and have a think, where did they begin? How did their careers kind of really kick off? And say for Abi Dare, who's speaking later, she won the Bath Novel Award in 2018, and she was a finalist for the literary consultancy Pen Factor competition in 2018. And those are all sorts of markers of, it just shows that other people are already interested in the work and there's going to be an audience for it. And then another way to build that presence is through social media. If you can create accounts on Twitter or Instagram, I think it's really important to join the conversation around books that you like and that you want to be, part of the publishing landscape. And it's really important to support the work of other writers. It's not just a platform to kind of promote your own work. It's not a one-way street, because I don't think anyone's interested in simply, following someone who's self-promoting constantly. And I think it's also important to do your research, know the media that your books will be promoted through, start reading them, thinking of features that you would write for publication. There'll be all sorts of publications dedicated to whichever genre that you're specializing in, be it crime or thriller, science, history. Just really get to know them, get to know the journalists that write for them. What is the kind of national conversation around that topic that is your passion? And again, then you can start writing articles, and a lot of that can be done through social media. Like a lot of journalists for publications like, say specifically for women of color, there are specialist publications like Galdem, Bad Form, Aurelia, or Black Ballad, and the editors there, they often do kind of feature call outs on Twitter, outlining specific topics that they're interested in hearing about. So you can, instantly have this direct contact with a journalist who may then commission you to write a piece, which then, leads to more kind of attention to your work. And that's, again, another byline that you can add to your biography. And then in terms of sort of, once you're there, when you're pitching, I think pitching emails, that's a whole other workshop that we could spend an hour on, I think. But I'd like to share a few key tips that I've kind of found useful over my decade in publishing. I've always thought it's, have you heard of KISS? Keep it simple, stupid, or keep it short and sweet. That means keeping it concise and relevant, because the thing in media is no one has the time to read blocks of text, and what you really want to do is convey your argument or your idea very kind of quickly. So what I sometimes like to do is think about, how would I describe this book to a friend, or this idea? How would I kind of encapsulate that in a tweet? And then I will attach like the longer piece, because once the email lands in the editor's inbox, they just get hundreds and hundreds of them a day. So if you can kind of just capture their attention immediately and lead them on to reading the piece in full, that seems to be the most effective way. And then thinking about hooks, I think it's always good to include any facts and statistics that you have to bolster your case. And media planners often plan around big anniversaries. So are there any that are coming up that you can hook up a piece onto? So in August, it's 60 years since the Berlin Wall was constructed, and I'll be pitching features on this book, Tunnel 29, around that. Another good thing to think about is, what's your angle? I.e., what are you saying that hasn't been said before? What's different? Because the media is obsessed with new ideas and new angles on stories. Personal experience is also, I think, really interesting, particularly for women's magazines. They're very interested in memoir pieces. And, do you have a unique perspective on a topic that affects a lot of people? And it's always important to provide context for a feature idea. Again, plugging into the national conversation around whatever topic it is that you specialize in. But with news, the obsession, is with something new, because everything moves so quickly. And by the time that a piece gets published, it could be old news, and everyone's moved on to something else, particularly in the age of Twitter, when you know, conversation is so accelerated. So I think always try to look to the future, and not just digest what's already happened. And on the screen, I've just listed a few prizes here. These are another useful way to signal to the media, publishing industry and booksellers about where your book fits in the market and who your audience will be. So entering these competitions and getting on those shortlists all adds to your biography. And there'll be, you know, specific ones around crime and thriller as well. So it's I think it's just mainly a lot of research and reading up on the kind of genre that you're trying to write in. And then I thought it'd also be interesting to talk about a little case study with Sally Rooney. When I worked on her debut launch campaign for Conversations with Friends about 5 years ago now, I think, I actually interviewed for my job at Faber and presented an 8-page campaign plan. I won't go into the very granular detail of that because that would take an hour. But I think the main thing for me about a successful campaign in publishing is sort of, I always kind of think about it as a single snowflake that kind of turns into a snowball, and as it rolls down the hill towards publication, it becomes an avalanche. And you know, it's when a book goes beyond the book pages, like the reviews and kind of books programs on Radio 4 and whatnot, and it goes kind of I'd call it a crossover, where it kind of crosses over into other cultural spaces. When like the reason that I knew that like the Sally Rooney book was becoming a phenomenon was sort of, you know, my auntie's book group. I'd never mentioned the book to her, but then they were doing it of their own volition, you know, as a discussion, and it wasn't just people in publishing talking about it. So kind of how does that begin? You know, before she was the #1 best-selling, prize-winning author with film and TV adaptations, and fans across the literary and celebrity worlds, she started as a debut author like many of you. She had published short stories in publications like The Stinging Fly and The White Review. And then after the book was acquired, she won the Sunday Times Short Story Prize, which then got her on the radar of the literary editor and opened doors later on. And then having that on the biography, you know, really helped my case when I was pitching for literary festivals, because it's, you know, with debut authors, they're an unknown quantity because people haven't encountered their work before. So having those sorts of things on your CV is that shorthand that makes people like sit up and think, I better book her. And then another part of it, the whole kind of publishing process, is editorial team find champions for the book. So they, you know, get quotes, endorsements from high profile established authors. So again, that sort of marker of quality. And then as a publicist, I'm targeting those journalists who will write about it, producers who will want to set up interviews with the author on radio or print or online. And then alongside the marketeers, we find influencers who will share the book on sort of Instagram and, you know, book vlogs, Twitter. I think also the author photo is quite something to kind of consider. Like, it's not simply a passport photo. I think with the author photo, you can kind of convey a story about who you are as an author. And for instance, for Sally, for her first one, I arranged, she'd sort of sent me this Spotify playlist that she'd been listening to when she'd been writing Conversations with Friends. And it had bands like Belle and Sebastian on it. So when I commissioned a set of author portraits, I booked someone who had a background in indie music because I thought they had sort of been part of the same world, and it would the style of photo that he took would sort of convey the kind of the world that her characters lived in. And then when I did a mailing to women's magazines, we sort of created a package with the proof copies of Conversations with Friends. And I included little bottles of Bombay Sapphire gin, and then there's sort of multicolored cigarettes with gold tips, and then a handwritten postcard from Frances to Bobby, sort of one of the emails that she writes in the novel where she's kind of wistful and kind of, again, sort of trying to convey the kind of the summer holiday aspect, friends talking late into the night and getting drunk and drinking cigarettes, and kind of the intimate conversations that they were having. And it kind of probably seems like quite a gimmick, and I wouldn't do that to, you know, every person in the media. That was specifically targeting women's magazines, because I think they're very interested in the sort of lifestyle element of books as well. Like, I don't think that approach would have worked for the Sunday Times literary editor, who is much more interested in the institutions that kind of have that Sally had written for, like the White Review or the Stinging Fly. But, you know, as a result of that mailing package, those women's magazine editors took Instagram photos and tweets with the whole package. And then again, that's like another bit of free publicity and getting the book cover seen and having it be recognized months before publication. And then from that, you keep building, and then it's sort of an unmissable image, so that by the time the book is published and it's in the bookshops and in bookshop window displays, people already have a sense of what it is. And then they see it in sort of a magazine or in a newspaper. They hear Sally talking on sort of Radio 4 Front Row, or they might see her listed in the Hay Festival brochure, or Cambridge Festival being interviewed by Ali Smith for her literary debuts panel. So the other kind of thing that's always stuck in my head is people say that you have to have seen a book 5 times before you buy it, because I guess if you think about every day, you're bombarded with so many sort of marketing messages, be it online or walking down the street, billboards for all sorts of different products. So it's just about getting your book kind of to be unmissable, just implanting that image in people's minds. But it's also really important to find and build a community. And when I started in 2010, around the recession, there was a lot of scary talk about Kindles bringing about the downfall of physical books, and, you know, social media competing for our attention spans. It was as if, you know, in 10 years, publishing wouldn't be here anymore because we'd all be on Twitter the whole time. And to some extent, that's true. But I think I'm very positive. Like, books are still here, bookshops are still around. There's so much conversation around literature and culture. And I mean, there's still a persisting idea that we're competing against things like Netflix. But I think actually the internet has, you know, aside from being sort of a democratizing influence, there are a wealth of opportunities to kind of find communities online. And, you know, when I began my career, I was really terrified about the idea of networking. I kind of always imagined that it was, you know, going up to someone senior at a party and sort of shaking their hand forcefully, and then giving them a crisp business card and making some kind of professional connection that way. It never felt sort of genuine to me, or something that I could really do with confidence. And, you know, I've never actually had a business card in my 10 years of publishing. I've never got round to it. And secondly, you know, I'm sure it's a legitimate way to make a contact, but I kind of never felt that comfortable with it. But yesterday I saw a post from about Issa Rae, where she kind of talked about, it's not about networking up, it's about networking across. And I think this really articulated something that I had been doing and some of my friends have been doing without really having an intention behind it. But it really kind of encapsulates that. She kind of talks about calling on your friends or colleagues and finding opportunities to work together. And, you know, I think it's so important that finding a community of peers who share the same passions as you do. So I would say a good way to do that would be to, once the pandemic is over, go to events. You know, writing a book can be a solitary experience, but if you go to book events, you're kind of getting a sense of the publishing landscape, the things that people are interested in talking about, how to do a book, how to do a good book talk. You know, you can support your local bookshop, talk to the booksellers. They're also passionate about reading. And when it comes to publication, they'll probably stock your book and possibly be, you know, hand selling it to customers who come in. You know, go to literary festivals, see who's being kind of paired together. What are the kind of like dominant themes and what can you add to that conversation? Book people are a pretty sociable bunch and, you know, love a party as well. So there are kind of chances to socialize. Particularly, you know, I've found the crime world to be really friendly and tightly knit. So you'll often find big time authors kind of mingling in the bar at places like Bloody Scotland or Harrogate Crime Writing Festival or Norwich. So I'm going to pivot from one favorite topic, books, to another, which is food. Not because we're approaching lunchtime, but it's kind of an illustration of what I've been doing without a budget. So in 2018, I started a Filipino supper club called Baboy Club. And this is kind of just a fun side project. I've always loved cooking. My friends have often said, like, you should write a cookbook, or I don't know, but this was a kind of a fun way to challenge myself to go beyond like having dinner parties or barbecues. It's like, let me see if I can host a dinner for 30 people with you know, no kind of training involved. And it's also kind of a fun way to kind of reconnect with my kind of culinary and cultural heritage, having been born in Manila and being thousands of miles away from my Filipino family. And what I found with this project was, you know, having a social media presence is a really fun way to document my adventures in food, kind of my journey towards writing a cookbook potentially. It's also research. It's like a photo blog shaping the identity of what I'm aiming for. And you know, when I started planning, I was thinking, I want to share the festive dishes from my childhood in the Philippines, because I sort of have this like nostalgic joy for them. And a lot of my friends weren't familiar with Filipino cuisine. So it's kind of a celebratory thing to bring those two together. And having a social media presence is really important because, you know, it brings media opportunities your way. I saw a Time Out journalist, Paula Akpan, tweeting out about doing a piece on London supper clubs, and as a result got her email, pitched to her directly, and then suddenly was, you know, in Time Out. And then again, the same thing happened with similar thing happened with Refinery 29. They actually DM'd me on my Instagram and then interviewed me for International Women's Day. I heard about the food podcast called Lekker. They were starting a zine, and then I was able to contribute my first recipe to that. And then again, that's me building my biography. And then sort of back to the idea of, and then, sorry, this is the Instagram kind of, this is me kind of sharing Filipino culture and food. And I take photos on holiday. I kind of just do it quite sporadically, but I enjoy it. And then back to online networks. Shortly after I started the Instagram account, the chef May Williams, who's the founder of Food with May, reached out to me via that account, which she was starting in the Filipino Food Group UK. And then through this network, we've been kind of meeting semi-regularly, dining at Filipino restaurants. We have a WhatsApp group where we kind of share recipes, talk about Asian representation in food media, give each other advice, champion each other's work, and then also spread the word about each other's projects. So it's just a really, really kind of supportive network of people who share the same passions and interests in Filipino food. And then from that base, I was able to start the Filipino Food for NHS project during lockdown last year. Because in March, through the Filipino Food UK group, we received a message from the charity Kanlungan about 30 nurses who'd just arrived from the Philippines straight after the COVID-19 travel ban. And they were feeling homesick and missing their kind of the food of home. And as a group, we were able to band together and volunteer our time and cook fresh Filipino meals. And even before that, fundraise on GoFundMe and share it through all of our social media platforms. And then as a result of that, we raised, £5,000 and provided over 2,500 meals to NHS staff working across London, Surrey, and Manchester. And that was, as a result of our combined social media presence. And then actually, a happy byproduct of that project, which I'd never planned for, was some interesting opportunities that came our way. Like the Museum of London contacted us and did an oral history about the project. And they've actually taken one of my spoons and they're going to put it in the permanent collection, which is something I would never have thought of at the beginning. And then actually, and a producer from MasterChef invited me on as a guest. So that's actually coming up in, I think, the next few weeks on BBC. And then we've just launched our second fundraiser and we're on £1,500 already. And this logo on screen was designed by my neighbour, Hannah. And I think that's, again, another example of maybe networking across. She did that pro bono. And then we've been able to, as a team, kind of share the image and fundraise. And if you'd like to donate, you can find a link through my Babboy Club Instagram. Anyway, I hope I've given an overview of the publishing industry as a whole and ways that you can promote your book. And I wondered if anyone had any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Maria. I'm going to just remove the spotlight, switch to gallery view, and also stop the sharing so that everyone can see your face. Hello, Maria. Thank you. We have so many people. I do apologise. My dog is just bothering me here. We have so many people in the chat who said thank you so much for the inspiration. Lots of hungry participants also, made hungry by your final slides. Looking forward to lunch already. And we do have some questions. So Mustafa would like to know, how many books do you in your job cheerlead at any given time? So how many kind of are you responsible for?
That's an interesting question because I'd say it's like 2 or 3 a month, but it depends on, I'm sort of sometimes working on books that are publishing in a year in advance. Most of the time it's, 3 months, about a 3, 4, 5 month lead up publication. But for the bigger projects and say for Sally Rooney, Conversations with Friends, that was, from the point that I was interviewing for the job and then the year leading up to her June publication, I was building that campaign all the way through. So having a long lead time, I think, is really invaluable.
Great. And then in your job generally, are you at any given time, is it sort of 3 big writers, 100 writers, 20? How many are you looking at?
Oh, well, it's 2 to 3 a month, but it's just
great.
So it just depends on. I'd say maybe like I'm in contact with probably a dozen at any one time, and it may be a small request or it may be kind of daily emails, dozens of emails and a phone call every week. It kind of just depends on the project.
Brilliant. Aruna has a question. She says, Maria, you spoke about brand. With social media, etc., it feels a bit like a necessary evil. What happens if you don't want that as an author, if you want your writing to speak for itself and not be part of a hype? Is there a place for these writers in the 21st century world?
So that's a very, very good question. And I mean, I do feel for authors in this day and age, because there's sort of an element where you have to be a multi-purpose person rather than, you know, I've written a book and hopefully that will speak for itself. And actually, you know, getting a publisher on board, that is kind of a big part of the process, because we're the ones trying to do that, getting the kind of literary champions, putting the quotes on the books. That's kind of the way. And I suppose having those prize, you know, shortlisting for prizes and whatnot. But yeah, I think if it doesn't feel natural to do the social media thing, you shouldn't force yourself. There are other ways, but I think it's probably mostly about getting your writing out there through writing articles or prizes.
And to the right readers as well. So if they're not on Twitter, why would you be? Which segues into Ian's question, which is that from a kind of publicity and or branding point of view, is it important that an author maintains the same genre throughout their career? Does the switching genre confuse selling opportunities or publicity opportunities?
I think probably it does, because it's sort of, I guess, like switching careers midway through, and then you're having to rebuild and find a new audience in that genre. But I don't think you should, if it doesn't feel right, I think it's kind of best to do what feels genuine and kind of authentic to you and what you're passionate about, because that's probably, yeah. I think, yeah, I don't. That's my personal take. I don't know if I'm coming at it from a publicity angle.
Yeah, sorry. I think that's a perfectly valid take as well. And that, yes, authenticity, absolutely key. And just being aware of it, that you know, you'll have different readerships for different things if you cross genres. I hope that answers your question, Ian. We have someone here who's asked, for LGBTQ+ writers looking to build their brand with stories about the community, how best can they reach across audiences so they're not boxed in and labelled as just writing LGBTQ fiction for LGBTQ+ people? I think that's a really important question that is probably around any boxing in or categorizing. But how can that be avoided or dealt with?
I guess writing for broader publications like The Guardian, but you know, it's not like a specifically LGBT publication. Does that kind of answer it?
I think it's about wanting to reach as many readers as possible.
Yeah.
And I suppose if you're working with a publisher who identifies, oh, this would be great for this readership.
Yeah.
How does an author navigate that if they believe it genuinely is for a wider readership?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for any campaign that I do, I work sort of with broad kind of national media targets, and then I have more specialist kind of publications, like say for the Phil Wang Side Splitter kind of book, which is coming out in September, and that's about mixed race identity and being kind of Chinese, Malaysian and British, how to be from two worlds at once. And I suppose you know, I'm aiming for things like the Observer magazine and FT Weekend, but also a big part of my campaign is reaching out to Chinese Malaysian communities online, like East Side Voices or you know, the Chippy Girl podcast or things like that. So I guess it's just having an honest conversation with your publicist about what your goals, and I would hope that they wouldn't be kind of pigeonholing you. I think yeah, it's about being ambitious about finding the targets.
Great. And we've got a couple of questions here about self-publishing. So there's a few, but a couple of them sort of are broadly about if you are either self-publishing or perhaps you are published but you have limited publicity support from your publisher for any number of reasons. How much in advance do you suggest making your own, you know, DIY publicity plan? And what are the best methods of going around building that, bearing in mind that you might not have a budget and you might not have access to national newspapers, radio outlets?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of do your research on all of that, all of the media that you're hoping to be represented in, and see how people are writing about the kinds of topics that you want to talk about. There's all sorts of homework like that you can do on your own ground, and again, like going to look in the back of books and check author biographies, and that can kind of spark off ideas too.
See what they've done and learn from it in maybe a smaller scale.
Yeah, and social media, like a lot of journalists are tweeting about, asking for new voices, really.
There's a big wave for that at the moment. We have an interesting question here from Kit, who asks, what lessons have you learned from any failed promotions, which we're not asking you to disclose what they might have been, but how can failed promotions help us learn about what to do? And can you give any examples? You don't have to name names.
Okay, I guess back at my first job in Penguin, there was always this kind of funny story from back in the day that is sort of the MD's idea to promote, I think, a book on natural history, and they had spent quite a lot of money on sort of a kind of headline grabbing stunt by they got a massive mammoth and they had it in Trafalgar Square, and I think the plan was to tour it around the country, but no. And actually I think a similar thing happened with the Will Gompertz book on modern art, where they got a massive like kind of toilet, like Duchamp toilet. I don't know, like it's a fine balance between doing something gimmicky and something and that's expensive and that doesn't actually like lead back to the book. So I think, yeah, that's the key thing is what is the aim of what you're doing? It's to get your book seen and therefore to have people buying it. So I think, yeah, it's about being targeted rather than just being splashy and I don't know, that's just quite silly. Like what was the aim?
Exactly. So being clear in your aim then is incredibly important for any campaign. I'm just reminded of Nikesh Shukla, who also sent some, were they ribs or was it some kind of meat into
some
space?
Tyabs. Yeah. I think some lamb chops from Tyabs, which did generate a lot of publicity and I suppose has helped him later on, but it didn't lead to book sales. He got, headlines across the press, right?
Yeah, he did.
And I think he might have been on the news as well, but like that got him, he's done other things as well though that I think were probably more valuable, like setting up the Good Agency and publishing the Good Immigrant. And again, I think maybe that's another example of networking across the Issa Rae idea that I was talking about.
I suppose that's what you were saying about being clear about your aim, that some publicity, if your aim is to sell more books, you'll have to have a particular approach. And some publicity, so we've got lots of questions from authors who are saying, I'm an unknown. Some of that publicity, if it's to drive visibility up for yourself, that can also be a valid outcome, providing you understand what you want success to look like for you. And we've got Paul here who asks, are agents and publishers likely to have an age glass ceiling? And in fact, we have a couple of questions about this. I regard myself as an autumn leaf. So writers who are coming to this either later in life or who've been plugging a while. Yeah.
Well, I think, I think it can feel dispiriting because, the very young authors can grab a lot of headlines, 27-year-old debut novelists, like there is an obsession with newness in media, but at the same time, there are, hugely successful authors who started later in life, like Anne Griffin, who we publish at Sceptre. Her debut novel, When All Is Said, she published that when she was 50. She'd only started writing 6 years previously. She'd done a creative writing course and had studied under Frank McGuinness and Anne Wright. And again, that's like a talking point for me when I talk to radio producer. That's kind of me building the story of who she is. So it's not a complete impossibility. And again, like, Anna Burns, she hadn't published a book in about 12 years. And then we ended up publishing Milkman, and it won the Booker Prize. And can't remember how old she was, but you know, she wasn't like a baby debut novelist, basically.
Yeah, so it's absolutely not a barrier. So hopefully that
Yeah.
answers your question, Paul. And Cora's got a question, which also speaks to a few questions here about writers who started in one, not necessarily a genre, but a different form. So Cora started in with poetry and is a published poet. So if, and maybe this is for anybody who's previously published something else like poetry, is there a way to capitalize on that in promoting, for example, a first novel? How far should you or shouldn't you use your history of publication in another area?
Yeah. No, I think that all counts. I think it's sort of a part of a stepping stone to that publication. I'm trying to think. There are all sorts of people who've transitioned, like Will Harris is a poet, and then he's published a couple of nonfiction books like Mixed Race Superman, and he's got another one on the way, I think. Who else? I think Sarah Elaine Smith, who wrote Mary Lou is Everywhere, she was a poet, and then, you know, that obviously informs her writing. So that's, again, I can talk about that poetic background and how that gets conveyed through the novel, even though it's a different form.
Fantastic.
And again, there's a really strong poetry community in the UK. So follow those poets. What are they talking about?
And with Publicity, you know, you're for any writers out there thinking, God, I'm doing it alone. You're always trying to tap into a community or a readership.
Yeah.
So very, very useful to remember that. Esme, I think so we've got a few more minutes. So this feels like, it depends on how quickly we run through the answer. So I do apologise if we haven't answered your question. We'll try and get through as many as we can. But Esme has got a great general question here to possibly to wrap the session up with. Could you tell us, what do you feel the new areas are coming up for debut authors to exploit and how they can make the most of those?
That's quite a big question. I guess, okay, I think what's interesting is, so Refinery 29 recently did a call out for books on Black joy. And I think that's something that maybe the publishing industry needs to get better at, not just writing, you know, not just publishing books about, you know, gay trauma or Black trauma, but, you know, joy and kind of life as normal, because I think marginalized communities shouldn't be defined by trauma. I think that's I think, yeah, and that's actually something I'm passionate about.
And we've had several people in the chat as well, just saying, you know, amazing to see someone so passionate, particularly about championing underrepresented voices in the literature sphere. And I suppose, and such a rich talk, says Pierre here. We've got lots of lovely comments, which we'll pass on to you because we'll keep a copy of the chat, Maria. But I think that last point is really, really valid to anybody coming from, you know, whether you're an older writer or a writer writing between genres or a writer writing about something that's maybe not quite the same as typecast. I think we've heard earlier from Leodora about genre cues and how important they are just from a marketing perspective. And it's nice to hear now from Maria about how you can also exist and talk and create stories and narratives outside of those that are really authentic to who you are and the story you are trying to tell. Because if you write with that conviction and that sense of purpose, you can convey that in the publicity or the noise or the buzz that you're generating. It's not just a branding opportunity, it is also about really clarifying for yourself the intention of your work and the kind of voice that you are speaking with and the place that you are speaking from. So thank you to Maria, that's a really encouraging place to finish our morning session. We're so pleased to have had you here. Thank you so much for your generosity and candor and time and passion. And to everybody now, we are going to break for lunch. We've got a 1 hour lunch break. We're reconvening for your breakout sessions. Please refer to the portal for your next links starting from, I think it's 1:05, the breakout sessions. We've got our writing breakout groups and then our pitching breakout groups. And then we're wrapping up the day with the TLC Pentactor announcements. We will, because we know we've had a few issues with the portal, it is back up and running. The forum is also back up and running. So on the portal page, please use the forum. We encourage you to promote your own work. I know that many forums don't let you. We think, why not? Now's the space. Be proud of who you are and what you're writing. We will reconvene in an hour. And for anybody who's worried about links, we're also going to send an email to everybody with just reminders of your links. So there's a safeguard just in case of anything happening with the portal. We thank you sincerely for bearing with us and for being with us. And we will see you after the break. And thank you again, Maria.
Thank you. Enjoyed that. Bye.
See you in an hour, everyone. Happy lunch break.